Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics. This video we're going to talk about shooting on the move with the red dot equipped handgun. This is the third video in kind of an unofficial series on building more efficiency into the red dot on the handgun. We talked about general accuracy and being able to diagnose problems with the dot itself. And then we talked about transitioning from target to target. And now we have to talk about shooting on the move, because that's, contextually, depending on the context of a situation, movement may be prudent, it may be forced. There are a lot of different situations in where shooting on the move can occur. And it's a skill that we can isolate and work on, and it's something that is a little bit different than what you may be used to with iron sights, so it's definitely something that we have to address. When I have students that are new to shooting a red dot equipped handgun, one of the most frustrating things they can do is have to shoot on the move. Reason being, the dot translates the natural movement more than is usually perceived with iron sights, because the iron sights are fixed on the slide of the gun and they move together, whereas the dot appears to move almost independently of the handgun itself. With a rifle, we don't necessarily notice it as much, or it's a little bit more controlled because you have those 4 points of contact. With a handgun, just having 2 points of contact or 1 point of contact, that exaggeration is going to present based on technique, and developing that technique requires practice. The tenets of shooting on the move remain the same. We want to isolate our movement, torso, from our legs. So our legs just kind of track us along, and the torso remains as stable as possible, because that's where we're going to be shooting. One of the issues that people can have is just their natural gait, their natural walk. Most people have been walking since they're about 12 to 15 months old, so they may not realize that they have a bounce in their step until they actually start shooting on the move, and it can become really, really frustrating really fast. You're not necessarily going to notice the problem the closer you are to your target, but the further you get back, or the more movement you have to do, or just the general environment in which you have to move on, can definitely complicate your ability to maintain a stable shooting platform. The skill set is developed through practice. Now, you can practice shooting on the move without actually firing any live ammunition up to a certain point, and that's just something you can do in your house. Something I do during my dry fire a lot is, especially now with RMR equipped handgun, is I'll find a point of aim, and it can be a man-sized point of aim, shrinking down into something like a light switch. That's a favorite point of aim for me. And I'll dry fire my way through the house, moving up the stairs, down the stairs. I've got stairs coming out of a den, I've got stairs going up to my second floor, and I've got general enough room to really work angles and work around obstacles such as couches and the island in the kitchen and things like that. So I'm able to get a lot of movement, not just forward and back, but left, right, lateral, so on and so forth. And that's really helped me smooth out more so than I thought I had to do, or what I thought I had to correct, my ability to shoot on the move. Now, it's dry fire, and even if you're getting trigger presses in, it's still not the same thing as firing live ammunition. You're not really getting an actual recording of your hits on a piece of steel or a piece of paper, but it's a good way to kind of practice the practice, if that makes sense. So how do we develop the skill for isolating our movement? Practicing it is great, but you have to know what to practice, right? And it just goes back to what I said. Your torso should be moving as independently as possible, and like I say, as possible, that's an important part of that sentence, from your legs. So your legs are going to, some people walk in like a slight duck walk or a small crouch, and they feel like that improves their stability, and I haven't really seen that prove itself true across all the people I've seen use that technique. It works for some people, but I also think those people could probably maintain that same level of proficiency just walking more naturally. You got to get the spring out of your step if you have it. If you got a little bounce in your hips, you've got to get that out of your hips as much as you can. One of my favorite ways to diagnose where I'm at is put up a man-sized target and start back at 25, 35 yards, and then work through a series of magazines as I move forward. Or I might move from 35 to 25, or from 25 to 15, because that distance is really going to exaggerate how good, or I should say it'll show how good, or it'll exaggerate how bad. It shows where your accuracy is at, basically. And the closer we are to the target, the less exaggerated those accuracy issues are going to be perceived on the target. The further back we are, the more evident they are, I guess is a better way to say it. But that's a good way to do it. If you're working from 35 all the way into like 3, you might not necessarily notice which rounds were shot from which distances. You can also do this on steel. If you have a man-sized steel target, just go ahead and paint it up and look at your hits between those distances, and that's a really good way to diagnose it. Now, when we specifically look at the dot's movement is going to be exaggerated. There's just no way around that. I like the 6.5 MOA dot. The 3.25 tends to exaggerate the movement a little bit more, but the 3.25 dot does give you a little bit more of perceived or actual accuracy at those increased distances. 6.5 dot at 35 yards isn't really that big of a deal, but for some people they want the smaller dot, and I totally get that. I shoot both. I still tend to go with the 6.5. Now, the movement of the dot is important. We've talked about this in the video before. We want that consistent washing machine. We want the dot to consistently float in that area. If we start to get erratic patterns in the dot, if it's going high left, high right, or if it's just bouncing up and down, there's no consistency. Now, if there is consistency in the pattern of the dot as it moves, and this is something you can diagnose without firing a single round, try to self-consciously identify what's causing that movement. And if you can identify what causes that movement, it can go a long way towards actually being able to fix it. Now, when we move and shoot, there's a lot to think about. Not only is movement a concern, but we also have to figure out when to time our cadence, when to time our shots. When I was first taught how to shoot on the move, we were taught to either shoot when both feet are on the ground or when one foot was in the air, kind of between steps, because that was perceived as to be the most stable time at which to make the shot. What I've seen and what I experienced myself when I was taught that is people tend to have a hesitation when they break that shot the further back they are. So if I'm walking forward from an increased distance, say 35 yards, and I'm consciously trying to fire when both feet are on the ground, I'm actually stopping and I'm getting that weight transfer. Think about pulling up to a stop sign and coming to a complete stop. You have a weight transfer that lets you know the vehicle has come to rest. The human body's kind of the same way in a sense, and if I'm trying to fire between steps, I may consciously or subconsciously, unconsciously, be stuttering as I move forward, so I'm not maintaining a consistent movement forward, a consistent pace. This can cause accuracy issues of its own, and it's something you can diagnose on your own. One of my favorite ways to diagnose and to actually practice my accuracy is on steel. I like to use a speed rack, a 6-plate, 5-plate, whatever you have, 8-inch, 6-inch. The smaller the better, really, but you might want to start out on a larger one if you have a choice between the two. You can do this on paper as well, smaller points, or just go for the A-zone on a man-sized target. Go ahead and paint those plates up, or go with a you know, an 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper on the high thoracic of your target, and work from 35 forward. And like on the plate rack, I want to clear those plates as quickly as I can moving forward. Moving backwards, there's that safety distance we have to recognize with steel racks. We don't want to be closer than 7 or 10, depending on what the manufacturer recommends and how the plate's designed. If it's got a forward angle on it or something like that, then I can work backwards. Another thing that I can do is I can actually work forwards, get a hit, backwards, get a hit, forwards, get a hit, backwards, get a hit. And this builds in my ability to shift gears very, very quickly. Now, once I've done that, once I've kind of got the rudimentary idea down, I can start incorporating a little bit more contextual or realistic movement. I can put obstacles in the way. I can have to navigate a small obstacle course or go from this cone to that cone, or however you want to set up the drill to isolate that skill set to build that proficiency. Now, when we mix that in with the techniques that we've already talked about in the previous videos, such as transitioning between target and target, now we're really building a foundation for using the dot just like we did coming up shooting iron sights. And once you get to the point where you can maintain a reasonable degree of proficiency, not only transitioning between 2 points of aim, but also shooting on the move and transitioning between multiple points of aim, you're going to get your skill set back to where it was in the iron sights. If you just recently got into red dots and found that, like, oh, my skill level went away, where did it go? I've been shooting my whole life, I'm really good with iron sights, I don't like this dot gun because I'm not as fast, I'm sloppy. You have to go through the same motions again to kind of reiterate the technique, slightly different from what you're used to with iron sights. The advantages are obviously clear, and I think you'll find that once you put in the time, you're going to get that skill set back if you lost it at all, and you're going to be able to shoot faster, and you're going to be able to shoot with more consistent accuracy regardless of the conditions you're shooting from. Just looking at two directions of movement, forward movement and then rearward movement. Forward movement, I treat my carry magazine like a full tank of gas. I'm not going to try to count rounds because that's not very realistic. It's not a really good habit to get into, even though it may be entirely possible that you'd be able to count rounds in an actual self-defense encounter. It's unlikely that that would even occur to you until after the fact, depending on how the situation developed. But we don't want to presuppose too much. But back to it. That magazine is a tank of gas. I've been driving my car for a while. I've been shooting my gun for a while. I know how long I've been driving, so I know I'm getting close to being empty without ever actually looking at the fuel gauge, and the handgun is no different. My carry gun's a Glock 17, Agency Arms Field Edition, 17 rounds in the gun. I have a general sense of how long I've been shooting, so I have a general sense of how much ammunition is left in the gun. I'm not going to be 100% accurate, But what I do, especially on forward movement, because the closer I get to my target, the faster my rate of shooting increases because I'm able to get hits more consistently. My target has grown in size if it's not moving around. So I'm getting closer to a reload. I don't want to have to reload in a closer proximity to my threat. I'd much rather be able to reload further back because it gives me a little bit more reactionary distance if something occurs during the reload. So what I do is I do what I call an emergency reload. Not a slide lock reload. Slide lock reload means you ran out of ammunition, there's an extra step, maybe 2 extra steps in there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm literally just gonna dump that magazine when I feel like I'm getting close to E, and I'm gonna go ahead and pull my other one and reinsert it. So I've removed some steps from the reloading process and I'm right back to work. Usually I'm giving up 2, maybe 3 rounds. Sometimes I catch it with the last round in the magazine, and that next round would have brought me to slide lock, but I'm usually within 1 to 3 to 4 rounds. Sometimes I've given up 5, sometimes I've given up 6. Because my spare magazine is 23 rounds, I'm willing to trade 3 rounds for a full magazine of over 20. I'd give up 10 rounds for that if I had to. And again, it's contextual. This is just kind of isolating the technique, but when I do forward movement, I like to incorporate that into it because realistically, that's what I would do. My thinking behind it is if I've been shooting for this long and I still haven't been able to stop because I haven't stopped my threat or threats, then I probably need that extra ammunition because I'm not done yet. So the faster I can get my reload done, especially as I'm closing into my threat, the better off I'm going to be. Now, moving in the reverse definitely takes a little bit of discipline because you get to start off with your super fast cadence, whatever that happens to be, because you're closer to the target, you can get better hits, which is all kind of common sense. But as we move to the rear, we have to understand that we're probably going to have to slow down to a reasonable rate of fire. Now, your grip and your trigger control, more just your general hold on the pistol, is going to dictate how soon you get your dot back from recoil. If your dot is recoiling back to the center from the left or back to the center from the right, then you're having grip pressure issues, and as you shoot and settle, one of your hands is driving the gun to allow that to happen. So we have to have that conscious diagnostics. Am I applying equal pressure to the gun? Because there's still some people out there who've been taught 60-40 or 40-60 or some combination of unequal pressure, which doesn't make sense to me. It never really has. Usually when people are putting 100-100, they tend to be able to maintain that stable platform more consistently than people who have been taught that unequal pressure balance on the handgun. The faster we shoot, the more we need that pressure. Think about your hands like a vise. If I can put the gun in the vise and my grip is vise-like, then it will help eliminate any potential issues my trigger control may cause, or it will help settle the dot in the window so when I do shoot and during recoil, I'm not losing the dot completely. Once I develop that proficiency, the dot should bounce to the top of the window, or maybe just bounce right in the center of the window, depending on, you know, what you're shooting, 9mm versus 40 versus 45, range ammo versus plus P ammo. Other things can factor into that. As I move backwards, I can readjust my point of aim, point of impact. My zero distance on my carry gun is 25. So when I'm up close at 3 or 5, I'm holding over probably about 3 inches, depending on my desired point of impact. As I move rearward, I settle back down into point of aim, point of impact, and try to maintain my consistency as much as possible. The last but most important factor of shooting on the move is where you break your shot. Once you develop the proficiency of movement, then we have to address the dot specifically and where we're deciding to take our shot. After you've been shooting on the move for a while, once you've got a lot of really good consistent practice, if you're able to, you'll probably find that you have a consistent point of aim issue until you work past it. The easiest way to work past it is figure out where you're breaking your shot, and this is where that diagnostic target comes into play. If my point of aim is the thoracic and I'm moving in from 35 and I'm hitting consistently low, which is what most people do, then you're probably trying to break the shot as the dot drifts down over your desired point of impact, which makes sense. You're breaking a little bit too late, perception is made, maybe you're staring at the dot when you shouldn't be, which actually exaggerates that issue versus staring at where you want to hit. So the alternate to that is think about a default point of aim. My default point of aim is the shoulder line. As I draw the firearm, I'm driving my sights or my dot out to right here. Now, that's not where I'm necessarily going to shoot, but that's my default ingrained Ingram motor skill, if you will. This is where I want my dot to be. But before it even gets there, I make a conscious decision, head, thoracic, or whatever. So even though my default is here, the dot usually doesn't end up there. And what I found, especially on shooting on the move, is if I maintain that higher than maybe what you've been taught with iron sights point of aim, my consistency, regardless of where I'm breaking the shot when the dot bounces up or breaking the shot when the dot bounces down, I'm consistently staying higher in that high thoracic if that's my point of aim. When it comes to the head, it's the same deal. Now, with the head being a smaller point of aim, I'm not going to shoot as fast, but the technique isn't going to change at all. I'm going to go for a slightly above center of nose point of aim with the dot, especially as I close in and I start to have to hold over as I'm moving forward. Most people's accuracy issues that I've observed when it comes to shooting on the move with the red dot handgun is vertical. It's not horizontal. Their horizontal is still on the target, sometimes C zone, sometimes B zone, sometimes A zone. But their vertical is where they're literally hitting low abdomen, pelvis, stomach, up into the low thoracic, or they're kind of stitching one shoulder or the other shoulder, which is a little less common. And that's an issue of deciding where to break the shot. The skill becomes inherent at a certain point, especially with good, correct practice, and you'll find that you don't even really think about where your feet are when you're breaking the shot. You're breaking the shot when the dot is where you want it to be. You have to find a balance between driving the dot to where you want to be, where you want to hit, and finding that natural point of aim where you want to hit. It's kind of an amalgamation or a combination between the two techniques, and I want to be able to steer the dot a little bit, but if I try to steer it too much, then I'm going to probably force the shot too far in that direction. So I don't want to have to overcompensate for bad movement by trying to drive the dot, if that makes sense. Once my movement is solidified, that natural break with just a small bit of adjustment should be where you're at. These skills take a while to develop, so don't feel bad about yourself. Think about how many rounds, don't feel bad about yourself if you're not doing well. Think about how many rounds it took you to get proficient on iron sights, and then get proficient on iron sights and everything we've covered in this series of videos. Red dot's going to require some relearning or some adjustment of nuance, if you will, to really bring your red dot skill back to where your iron sight skill is. And once it gets there, it's only going to improve from there. I know just my short years shooting with a red dot, dedicated just shooting red dot handguns for my own personal practice for duty carry, and when I take classes on my own, I always shoot dot guns. I generally only shoot iron sight guns when I teach classes where most of the students are shooting iron sight guns, and I need to teach them iron sight, so I use an iron sight gun to demo, because there are some differences, you understand. But what I've seen just in my short years of shooting them is I met my iron sight skill level and then I surpassed it. And I'm only getting better from there, but now the improvements are very, very small. If we look at the three common metrics of firearms, distance, accuracy, and speed, I've improved in all three categories. But when I initially adopted the red dot gun, I almost put it aside altogether because I went down drastically in all three of those categories. So just like anything, you have to put in the time. There's no natural talent about this. Some people may develop the skill faster, but no one just picks up a red dot gun and maintains a degree of fundamental proficiency across the board regardless of the situation they're put in. You got to put in the work. Constant, consistent, deliberate practice. I'm Aaron Cowan with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly. The tenets, really annoying. The tenets of shooting on the move with the handgun. Finally hit it. This is what I deal with sometimes. That's 300 meters. That's a fast cadence for 300 meters on a monopod. All right, back to it.